Our next talk is Luciano Avendano with Code 42, based out of Minneapolis. His talk is Cloudy with a Chance of Purple Rain. Just magnificent color scheme. But essentially a presentation on using the Stratus Red Team and VECTR to automate and do like a purple team assessments. Would you say that's fair? Like in your own? Well, he's the authority. I'm going to shut up.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. What's up, BSides Portland? Thank you very much for the opportunity to come over here and talk a little bit about pen testing in the cloud. For the purpose of the talk, I'm going to focus on AWS mostly, but the tool that I'll be talking about does apply to some of the other cloud vendors like Azure and GCP, and there's some stuff in there for Kubernetes as well too. But for the purpose of the talk, just Amazon AWS. What I got on the agenda, so I'm gonna give a shout out to my purple team at Code 42. We've been, over the last few months, they've been, sort of the inspiration for putting the presentation together. We've had several exercises where we just learned so much about our cloud environment, right? And we figured that at the end, when we started putting a lot of these findings, a lot of the just stuff that we were kind of working through, the challenges, we were like, you know what, this would be really awesome if we put it together into a presentation and kind of put it out there to the community, and hopefully others can learn from it as well. So ultimately, my goal is to kind of give this as another resource for pen testers, red teamers, blue teamers that are using the cloud as their CI/CD pipeline to host their products, whatever your company is using the cloud for. This can hopefully help you. I'll give a little bit of background and context on what we will discuss. A little bit of the preparation and execution that kind of goes into the exercise. You know what? After I kind of started going through this, I realized that this could have been a workshop as well, rather than a talk, because a lot of it is obviously hands-on keyboard, working through some of the actual exercises and executing the binary at your terminal. Then I'll talk a little bit about detection and what we use to document it. And detection and documentation could can be used in the same sense. Lessons learned, and then I'll just conclude it with that. But ultimately, I hope that you learn a little bit about cloud pen testing. Okay. All right, so shout out to Laura and Zach. They have been instrumental in working. So they're my blue teamers. I'm the only red teamer right now currently with the company. They've been super instrumental in helping me put these exercises together and getting a lot of value from them as we go through them. So we've been working on this for the last several months now, and a lot of value has come out of it. So shout out to them. All right, a little bit of background on modeling attacker behavior, especially in the cloud. I'll talk a little bit about threat intel, detecting your IOAs, IOCs, or indicators of compromise, indicators of attacks. A little bit about purple teaming in case there's some of you that don't understand the concept of purple teaming. And then I'll talk about or mention a little bit of complexities in the cloud and how Stratus can kind of help solve some of those complexities. So modeling attacker behavior, I'm sure you've all seen the cyber kill chain, whether it be Lockheed Martin, the unified kill chain. This is an example of the mandiant targeted attack lifecycle. I wanted something simple, so I kind of used this. The idea behind here is that you want to model attacker behavior, especially in the cloud. There's not too many resources that can kind of help you figure out how a lot of attackers are gaining or compromising cloud environments. For Stratus, doesn't really cover the entire life cycle. What you'll notice is that Stratus is more of a post-compromise tool that can help you after there's been a breach, right? But the idea with Stratus is that it'll recreate a lot of that attacker behavior so that your blue team can respond to it more efficiently. So I use this more as just a model. Not only that, but it can also help you develop more of a full kill chain exercise where your red team can obviously do a lot of the initial recon, part of the initial compromise, and then use Stratus as a post-compromise tool. I'm sure you've all seen the MITRE ATT&CK matrix as well too. There's a really good section in there for Cloud Matrix. I wanted to mention that as well too. This was a really good resource for developing some of our exercises, right? Because you can go through them as part of each one of those phases of the kill chain and see which one of those can apply to Stratus. From there, we can just kind of organize it and, more so use it as a blueprint. So just kind of putting it up there for reference. Threat intel and detecting IOAs, you'll notice that the Stratus can also help you, and I'll talk a little bit more about Stratus. I know I'm just mentioning it right now. It'll help you start building a catalog of IOAs and IOCs, right? If you don't have that right now, it's such a great way to baseline that, right? Because if you get asked that question is like, okay, what kind of IOAs or IOCs are we looking for in the cloud? And if you don't really have a quick answer to that, this will help you build that catalog so that when you ultimately build detections or alerts out of it, this can become a good reference. Now, I put a good, some SIEM solutions out here, because these are a good way to start collecting a lot of that data, right? And I know some of these are pricey, especially when you work in a small to medium-sized business. But they ultimately help you collect a lot of that activity, store it into an appliance like Splunk or Sumo Logic, and start building off those queries, right, to build your detection or alerting from it. So again, for the purpose of the talk, I'm using AWS. Right there, there's a small little CloudTrail snippet of a log entry. You could then either keep it in CloudTrail, which I don't recommend because it's much harder to parse through a lot of the CloudTrail activity. Instead, you want to send it off to a log collection, some log collection system. I could have put Elk up here too as well too. That would have sufficed as a good solution. All right, concept on purple teaming. It's a buzzword, right? That's kind of been around for a little while now. We've adopted the methodology at our company, and it's been working really well. The program just continues to mature, right? The more and more that we run these exercises, the better it helps us in testing these attack techniques, improving, it's definitely helping improve our defenders, improve our communication. It obviously fosters collaboration and lessons learned. This model will probably not work for everyone, right? But it's a good model if you have a good team. If you have a good team, good attitude, right? A good sense of collaboration and just the whole communication aspect of it. But the more and more you do this, the better you get at it, right? So I'm up here telling you that this works. This works if you have a good solid team that will help you improve it. What I didn't mention, though, is that the whole concept of purple team, right? You have your red team, which is your attackers or your offensive security, and you have your blue team, which is your defenders, right? So when you combine both of them and you work together, obviously you get purple, and that's the naming behind it. All right, complexities in the cloud. Difficulty in setting up a testing environment. It can be, right? And the reason why I bring that up is because you have several cloud providers. Each one of those cloud providers has hundreds of services, right? Yeah, some of them are similar, they can kind of, there's some overlap between AWS and Azure, for example, right, in concept, but naming may not be the same. The naming or, just the way the authentication authorization mechanisms work, completely, totally different. They're vendors. Their idea is to, build a much better model than their counterpart, so that's what makes it complex, is when you build a testing environment, it's like, what cloud provider do I use? What cloud provider is your organization using? Or which cloud provider do they intend on utilizing for their services? Emerging threat landscape, that's another big one. Because there's so many cloud providers and cloud services, that threat landscape becomes much bigger. The attack surface becomes much bigger, right? So having a good understanding of that can help out. And I just mentioned different cloud providers and different requirements. That's true, especially in authentication and authorization. Each cloud provider can have a different mechanism for that. Security controls can be challenging. Yes, they can. I just mentioned that each one of those cloud providers can have hundreds of services. How do you protect every one of those, right? And you go to AWS, they have something like CloudWatch that'll help you monitor a lot of your services. Azure has something completely different. GCP, Google Cloud Provider or platform has a completely different one. So that it becomes a huge challenge. I mentioned new tools and technologies can also present a challenge, right? So when you incorporate or you adapt a new tool, especially if it's a new tool that nobody has played around with or had time to like actually try out. It can be challenging because you have to learn how to deploy it. You have to learn how to teach others how to deploy it and use it. It may require several dependencies, right? Either software or hardware. It may require support, maintenance, patching, right? Like all these things that kind of go into implementing a new tool. And for some, it could become a roadblock, especially in lean security teams where your security team is only like maybe 3 or 4 people, right? And they're all doing all those security things. So I present you Stratus Red Team, right? I'm going to give a huge shout out to Christophe Tafani the Reaper. He's an employee at Datadog. He's the one that currently is maintaining it. I mean, there's several, it's open source, right? So there's several people that are kind of contributing to it. What it is just a collection of cloud native attacks. Currently, AWS has the most attacks as part of the tool. They just started adding more for GCP. There are some attacks for Kubernetes and Azure as well too. Very similar concept to Atomic Red Team by Red Canary, if you're all familiar with it. All right, it's just a collection of attacks that you can deploy in your own corporate network or corporate system and infrastructure that can help you, run these attacks, exploit a system or exploit some file system, and gather passwords and help the blue team detect those. Very similar concept. That's exactly what Stratus is doing. So when you run Stratus, it will launch an attack. It'll generate all of the activity and allow the defenders to then look at that activity so they can build your IOAs and IOCs out of that, right? Or your detection rules and detect alerts. It easily maps to MITRE ATT&CK, and it's executed via CLI. So there's no complex systems that you have to set up for it. It's a Go binary that I'll mention in the next slide here. It's a Go binary that you can easily pull down from the GitHub repo and deploy it in any Linux, Windows, or Mac OS endpoint, right? The easiest way that I found personally to deploy it is just download the binary, because then I can just kind of move it around, or not even that, just make it easier. It's already compiled for your operating system, and you don't have any other dependencies to install with it. You can also use brew install on Mac OS if you want to go that route, or you can also just pull down the Docker image as well too. It does have one third-party dependency, but it is part of Stratus, and that's the beauty of it. It's HashiCorp's Terraform. If you haven't heard of Terraform, it's an awesome, basically, instrumentation tool, right? It has an AWS CLI API that's able to connect to your AWS and kind of set up a lot of the infrastructure, or the prerequisite infrastructure, as part of the attack, and we'll kind of dive into it a little bit later. But there's no extra installation for it. The first time you run Stratus, it actually pulls down the Terraform binary from the correct source, right? It doesn't actually go out anywhere else to pull it down. So that if you're running Terraform already in your environment, it doesn't mess with that version of Terraform, right? Like this is a sort of a self-contained, locally controlled on your file system, right? It has nothing to do with any other version of it. Some of the key concepts. So 4 main key concepts for Stratus, right? There's a warm-up where you run the warm-up command, and that's where it sets up your pre-rec infrastructure without detonating. So it doesn't actually launch the attack yet. It has to make sure that prerequisite infrastructure exists. And what I mean by that, for example, if we are going to try and exfiltrate an S3 bucket, well, that it won't mess with any existing S3 buckets currently in your AWS environment. It's going to create one as part of the warm-up. That's the one that we're going to mess with as part of the test. That's why I kind of point out that it's good to have a good testing environment, right? Whether it be like a free account that you get with AWS. That way you're not messing with anything production. All we're getting from running Stratus is the log activity. That's what we're interested in, right? Like when we run one of these techniques, what does it actually look like on the log? And we're gonna see that right now. Detonate actually executes the attack. Revert can put you back to a state where you can re-detonate an attack, right? So if you wanted to, rerun the same attack multiple times, the revert command can kind of put you into that state where you can rerun it again. And then cleanup, this is one of my favorite features from this tool is that the cleanup will basically leave everything back the way it started. So if it created an S3 bucket, it'll remove that S3 bucket so that you don't have any dangling resources left over behind. That's awesome. Not a lot of tools do that. If you all are familiar with pen testing tools for the cloud, there's a framework called Pacu, which is very similar, except that Pacu doesn't actually create any prereq infrastructure for it, right? Like with Pacu, you're pen testing your production environment essentially, if that's the route you go. With Stratus, it creates the prereq environment for you so that it doesn't mess with any of your production resources. So it's as easy as having an AWS account ready to go. You can list all the attack techniques that are available, and you just detonate it. That's as easy as it gets. There's no like extra fluff that you have to add to it. Under the hood, so here's what it does. I mentioned warm-up to create that prereq, right? So on the left frame, we have our Terraform main TF file. Stratus creates this for you, right? It says, okay, I'm going to, for this one, I'm launching, I can't even see my own slides. This attack technique is going to grab EC2 password data for Windows EC2 instances. All right? You don't have to have EC2 instances already set up in your environment. Terraform is going to create it for you. Right? So this first file, as you run warm-up, it's going to create that infrastructure for you. It's going to add the necessary roles to it, right? And then it's just going to sit there, and it's going to wait for you to detonate it. Once you're ready to do the attack, your blue team is ready, like, all right, we're ready to parse those logs, look, start sifting through those logs. You hit detonate, and it does the attack. In this one specifically, I'm running a get password function. So that's what you would be seeing on the other end. So I use CloudTrail as sort of the log activity that's happening. What Stratus did, what the developer did, which is a great design, right? So instead of just having tons of like this activity and kind of sifting through it and trying to figure out, well, which are the events that I'm interested in that Stratus created? He prepended a user agent with Stratus on it, with just a UUID that's just kind of arbitrary. But as your blue team is going through the logs and looking for this activity, they just search for Stratus, right? And it'll find all the activity that Stratus did. Detonation, that's when you actually execute it, all right? So once you execute the attack, you can, man, I only have 2 more minutes. All right, VECTR, this is the other tool. So this is a tool that we use for actually collecting and documenting that data. So VECTR is currently developed by Security Risk Advisors. It's a free documentation tool. It's really good for purple teaming as well. You use it. I have the no more spreadsheets little cancellation over here because when we started these exercises, we were using spreadsheets. Very easily, very quickly, that got very unmanageable. So we started using VECTR, right? It's a web-based GUI. It basically collects all that information. Quick concept, so you have an assessment, you can start the assessment, you have a campaign, which is a group of tests right under the assessment, and then all your test cases, and these are your attack techniques. So it basically organizes all this information for you. I'm gonna forward this, and here's where we start our actual purple team. In VECTR, we can create a new assessment, a new campaign. That's the cool little GUI window where you actually enter your attack technique and start documenting that. The left side is your red team, the right side is your blue team. Right here, I'm using so a few years ago, 2021, Ubiquiti had an insider incident where an insider employee was basically impersonating an attacker, right? And they were managing an AWS account, and one of the things that they did to cover their tracks is they set a lifecycle rule in their AWS policy to delete any logs after 1 day, right? So there's an attack technique for that, and if you wanted to see what that looked like, you could use Stratus to kind of run that attack. For this example, that's exactly what I'm using. And there it is, I kind of highlighted it right there. So I ran that attack using Stratus. I go over to CloudTrail. I'm using just CloudTrail for this example. And that's what that activity would look like. I have the API, the lifecycle configuration. There's some of the parameters that are part of it, and the expiration date is set to 1, right? So that's the activity that I'm interested in. So when I share that with the blue team, or the blue team actually finds that, that's what they would be looking for. From there, they can obviously create an alert or document it. So here I walk through some of the steps that you could have your red team and your blue team kind of go through as part of the exercise. One of the cool things about VECTR is once you get done with your test cases, you get this nice little report with pie charts and graphs and all that can kind of help your executive or your leadership kind of tell what your progress is, how how the team's improving running these exercises. Right here we failed. I ran 3 test cases and none of them were detected. Lessons learned. That's where you kind of start talking about, all right, what worked, what didn't work, let's go back through it. It's all through iteration, right? The more iterations you have, the better you get at these things. Conclusion. So as you're going through it, I mean, these are some of the questions that you want to ask too is like, is this part of you want to look at what normal behavior is compared to abnormal. So that's one of the main takeaways as well too, is you can start looking at historical activity in your organizations compared to some of these test cases. Look to see if it's normal, legit traffic, or if it's abnormal. You start doing some threat hunting as well from there too. Okay, and I just list some references up here for anyone that's interested in kind of doing some purple teaming with it. I know I ran out of time. I kind of rushed it a little bit at the end. Now that I think about it, this could have definitely been a good workshop as well too. So.
You have a few minutes for Q&A.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, thank you. Give me some good questions.
So let's assume my aim is to test out S3 bucket. The first tool you mentioned creates its own S3 bucket, but you don't want to mess around in production. How is that mimicking my environment? Is it copying the settings of the S3 bucket in the prod and applying it in the new bucket? I'm trying to get
That's an awesome question. No, it's not. It's in reality, it's not, right? It's if you have an S3 bucket and it has certain policies in there, certain roles and permissions that certain groups can access or not access or public. It's not. It doesn't do that. The idea with Stratus is that it recreates the infrastructure and attacks it so that you can see what that behavior looks like, right? So you're collecting a lot of that activity. But you as a defender or even as a red team operator, those are the questions that you ask. Because that's what we've been asking. Now, we've been finding a lot of this ourselves is like, hey, is this part of the process? Is this part of the business process? Like this doesn't look right. Why are these, should we have these permissions, open to the public? Like, exactly like what you're asking. So that's where it kind of comes in really handy. Great question though. Thank you. Anyone else? Come on, ask me something.
Since I know people always want to know about the spend associated with creating cloud resources, does Stratus have some way to track or plan to know if you're running these exercises over some period of time? Would a customer or executive know, okay, how much is it going to cost me to spin up and run these target resources for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. It doesn't. That's why I kind of introduced VECTR as sort of being that sort of documentation tool. When we initially started like just putting all this stuff in spreadsheets, right, and we were realizing that it was just too much data to collect. Not only that, but for a lot of these different, so right now currently it has like 27 attack techniques, right, for AWS specifically. It has 27 attack techniques. And they all could very well be normal behavior in some instances, right? Like, I can't give a good example right now. I can't think of something off the top of my head. But for the most part, a lot of the ones that we've gone through have been abnormal where we're like, well, nah, nobody should be running that, right? But yeah, just to answer your question is like VECTR has been that reporting sort of tool to kind of help not just executives, but other teams like, hey, look at this. This is what we've been doing. Help us figure out some of this stuff out. Cool, great question. Awesome, I think that's it. All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, BSides.